What's up, design family, and welcome back to another episode of Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you back on the channel. On today's episode, we'll be looking at the key principles for designing female sportswear. As a sportswear designer creating various garments over the last 5 years, there are a ton of lessons I've learned and a lot of tough lessons I've had to learn for designing for women specifically. I wanted to share these with you today as someone who has definitely made his share of mistakes and has learned a ton. We'll categorize these key principles over 3 main fields. We have fit, fabric, and function. If you guys have ever wanted to get into the sportswear space or just wanted to know more about the intricacies of designing for different genders, this is going to be the video for you. Hey guys, and welcome to Fittdesign TV. So glad to have you here. On this channel, we discuss all things sports fashion, graphic design, manufacturing, and technology. We'll discuss key topics, answer pressing questions, and provide actionable steps on starting your own product line. If you're interested in any of the above topics, stick around. You're in for a good one. We'll start off by mentioning fit. Fit can have 2 key approaches when it comes to designing sportswear. On the one hand, it can accentuate and flatter a physique by creating a visual or almost like an illusory look to the garment. On the other hand, we can look at having a very functional approach to how we consider fit. If you look at compression wear, it's overly fitted for a reason. It's meant to promote blood flow and ultimately help with your recovery times. And at the same time, if we have ultra thick thermal wear that's meant to protect you against the elements in colder and more harsh environments, this is another example of how the fit of the garment can definitely help push that agenda. When it comes to visually accentuating the parts of the physique, we can first look at elongating the legs. This is quite simply done by creating up and down seam motions that can make your model to look longer and more slender. You can do this either by material blocking, color blocking, or using the seams themselves to draw attention to those portions. Also, look at how you can potentially narrow the waist. So by creating a higher front rise, this is something that can both help make your legs look longer and at the same time push for what's known as the hourglass physique, where you have a more narrow waist and you come out towards the waist or the hips and go back in towards the thighs. So sort of creating this curvature of the body. This is a very flattering and a historically feminine look, so it makes sense that you can push that with your sportswear. Ways that you can make the waist look more narrow are 1, by creating a higher front rise, so having a little bit more fabric on the front to kind of cover up the portion of where your pelvic region meets in with your hips and your waist ultimately as you go into your torso. And at the same time, you can also create a visual connection between the hips and the thighs by coming out from the hips in towards the thighs, also pushing that hourglass physique further. You'll also want to look at different body parts to accentuate depending on your design. So obviously not all designs will want to have this overly feminine or kind of stylized look, but if that's something that you're going for, you can look at potentially framing the rear or the hamstrings or the thighs, again by using seam lines, color blocking, or material blocking. On the flip side, there are parts of the body that you don't want to call too much attention to because it just may not be appropriate for that specific design or in general for the privacy of the wearer. So something like the pelvic region is not a region that you want to have too many seam lines or too many cuts across or framing. It's just not a flattering look. Also consider the way that your garment fits in certain portions. So for example, if you have too much fabric on your front rise, you end up with a situation where you just have too much sagginess in a garment that may not make sense for that. Or if you have too little fabric on the front rise, you may end up with too much tension in that portion, creating a situation like camel toe. So this is a clear example of how having a bad fit can also be negatively impacting on the way that a design can interact with the wearer. So make sure that you have your fit down and that you're using it for both a visual push on the garment and at the same time a performance push. If you can merge those 2 things together, you can really come up with a design that is both flattering and extremely performant. Number 2 is your fabric. This is the holy grail of every design. It's the physical embodiment of all the hard work you put in. There's no point in creating the perfect design with the perfect fit if you're not going to pick the right fabric to match it. It's important to understand your target customer market. So What does that mean? If you're a luxury operator and you're putting out a horrible and a cheap fabric that doesn't work, you're not going to match, or you're not going to reach your target market, and it just won't make sense. Ultimately, it will push people away from the beautiful designs you've created. On the flip side, if you're targeting a more mass market and you need to keep your costs down in order to compete, but you're picking a fabric that is 90% of your budget, that also doesn't make sense. So make sure to pick the right fabric for the right market. And with that being said, when it comes to ladies apparel, there are a couple of key characteristics that we'll want to consider for fabric. And number one is definitely for the fabric to be comfortable. It should be both soft and comfortable, a fabric that you want to be in, you want to perform in. So you could look at either a peached or a cotton finish to create that cotton-like feel while still being able to use things like polyester and nylon for their performance aspects. It's also extremely important to make sure that your fabric is breathable. The last thing you want to do is work out an apparel that just makes you sweat in a way that is overly suffocating. So make sure that your fabric is both relatively lightweight if it's suitable, and that it lets air permeate through and you feel well ventilated and just overall comfortable in your apparel. Obviously, it's extremely important that your fabric is performant. At the end of the day, your fabric is the primary shield that shields you from the elements. So if it doesn't perform the way that you need it to, even the best design is going to fall flat on its face. And when it comes to sportswear, performant fabrics are of special importance. So look at fabrics that are great with sweat wicking. If you're going to be doing heavy workouts in a fabric, it needs to make sense that it's going to be able to cool you down and not overly collect sweat. You don't want sweat puddles or large sweat patches when you're working out, especially for the female demographic. That's something that they are specifically conscious about, and it's not something that you want to have regardless of gender. At the same time, look at fabrics that have technical finishes. So whether that's an anti-odor finish that can help prevent against bad smells, or it's an anti-static finish where if you're moving in a high impact sport, you're just not building up extra static charge, and that can actually be an issue for some people. So anti-static functional finishes could also help. Look at other things like anti-shear or a high color fastness. These will have a pretty profound impact when it comes to the performance of a fabric. If you have a garment that's geared towards a compression market where you have women that are squatting or doing high impact lifts in them, and they require the fabric to stretch and they require the fabric to move with them, the last thing you want is a fabric that shears and lets extra light through and ultimately makes the wearer feel extremely uncomfortable when they're using it for its primary function, which is sportswear or sports performance. So make sure that you use the right fabrics. You can achieve this with two main ways. Number one is use a fabric with the right amount of thickness. You don't want to go overly thin, but at the same time, you may not want to go overly thick. So make sure you pick a GSM that makes sense for that garment. At the same time, pick a fabric that may have a different type of knit construction to give it higher density. Most knitted fabrics are made out of a single jersey knit. That's great for pretty much all of your everyday apparel. But for something like a high impact legging or a sports bra, you may want to look at an interlock finish. This sort of double knits the fabric and creates a higher density look without overly increasing the thickness. And again, just because you're increasing the thickness doesn't mean you're increasing the performance. The last thing you want is to create a overly thick fabric that constricts the wearer and makes them feel hot and bothered and just not a comfortable experience overall. Then you'll want to look at the color fastness of a fabric. This is extremely important when it comes to the function. A good color fastness will mean that a fabric is able to hold on to the vibrancy of its colors for a long period of time. So this is a quantitative measure, and you want to pick a fabric that has high color fastness. You can pick the best fabric, but if after 4 or 5 washes it's completely losing its dye, this can definitely make sure or lead it to be perceived as cheap or lesser quality. And especially with the female demographic, this is something that they're quite sensitive to. The last thing you want is a fabric that just looks desaturated a couple of wears in. Last but not least, we'll look at the functionality of sportswear, especially the way that women perceive required functionality. And believe it or not, even within sportswear, there's not a one-size-fits-all garment set. There's not one garment that can do everything and can fulfill all of the needs that sportswear has to offer. And if you're not sure about what I mean, bear with me. I like to believe that within sportswear there are a variety of different niches. There's something as simple as the sort of lounge activewear set, which is a lot more relaxed and casual. And then you have your much more performance-oriented apparel that is built for high impact. And then lastly, you have your sort of everyday casual activewear that's more fashion focused and can be dressed up or dressed down. And these different segments will have their own requirements when it comes to function and the way that your fabrics and your fits interact with them. And I'll run you through them one by one, and we'll start off with the lounge activewear set. Here, you're definitely looking at fabrics that have a slightly relaxed to oversized fit with tones that can either swing from being extremely polarizing and high tonality, so loud colors that are very present, or on the other side, colors that are extremely neutral and colors that sort of follow a more earthy and a pastel palette. There's really no in between, because with lounge activewear, it sort of caters itself to a more fashion focused market. Look at fabrics that are both soft and comfortable, something that you want to stay and kind of lounge in, hence the name. At the same time, you'll want to look at things that are slightly medium to heavier weight. So fabrics that make you feel cozy and fabrics that can have the end user just feel overly comforted. Next, we have performance wear, and here the primary function is performance. So a fabric should be able to move with the wearer. It should be able to cool them down or to warm them up when needed. So basically to achieve balance or homeostasis. At the same time, you want to be able to keep bad smells away and make sure that you avoid the effects of shear. These are all pushed to their limits when it comes to performance wear, because you're really pushing the garment and the fabrics. So some primary functions of performance wear are cooling you down. So making sure that a fabric has a high sweat wicking ability, one that's able to take sweat away from the surface of your skin and cool you down, is essential. At the same time, a fabric that doesn't hold on to smells, because if you're working out, you're going to be sweating. And this is an area where really, if a fabric isn't performing well, you can end up with an unnecessarily unflattering experience. So picking fabrics that are anti-odor or anti-static that can resist that momentum is extremely important. At the same time, when you're moving your body around, your fabric should be able to move with you, and it should be able to stretch in a way that makes sense. So fabric that has a high stretch but doesn't lack an anti-shear ability. So a fabric that is able to keep out light and not be see-through when it's pushed to its limits is extremely important. This can also help the compression of the fabric. We all know that compression wear is extremely beneficial when it comes to recovery times. It promotes blood flow, and overall it's just the right sort of fit for a high impact training session. Making sure that your fabric can follow suit and can sort of empower that and embody that is extremely important. So bear in mind, your sports performance fabrics and your performance functionality should be pushed to the forefront if you're categorizing or if you're sort of catering to this sector. When it comes to performance wear, obviously here your primary focus is on performance. So both cooling down or warming up the wearer, being able to move with the body and resist the impact of high intensity training. This is going to come down to the fabrics chosen and ultimately the fit. If you're going for something that's more of a performance oriented fit, then a compression fit is going to be great. It's going to allow you to promote blood flow and ultimately the recovery times, and there's a lot of proven health benefits to compression wear. At the same time, picking the right fabrics that are both sweat wicking and anti-odor can create an overall better and more efficient user experience. So a fabric that doesn't shear with stretch is extremely important, especially when doing movements like squats. The last thing you want to do is be super into your workout and have a fabric that isn't moving with you, or necessarily a fabric that is compromising you in one shape or form. At the same time, it's extremely important to consider your color schemes. Typically with performance fabrics, you end up with louder colors that can signify energy and just movement overall. You typically tend to see these louder colorways in much more high impact garments, and that's something that you can take advantage of. Use fun color schemes to push the energy of your designs and ultimately to flatter the physique and create a just more vibrant and energetic feel to your design. Last but not least, when it comes to consider the different niches for how to structure your functionality, we sort of have your everyday functional activewear. This is a fashion-focused activewear that also doesn't sacrifice performance. It's sort of the middle ground, and in my opinion, it's the perfect embodiment of what sportswear can be and what it has become. The kinds of fabrics that you'll want to pick are lightweight to medium weight fabrics that have a high breathability and are also decently performant. You don't have to pick the most durable or the highest impact fabrics, but something that is able to take you through a jogging session or a lightweight warming up or training session is probably a must. Also, push for functionality, but don't overdo it. An overdoing of functional design can turn out gimmicky and may not be appropriate for something like a everyday activewear set. And when it comes to your color schemes, look at a middle ground color scheme. So colors that are versatile, that you're able to dress up, dress down, and even pair with garments that fall outside of this niche. So this is a very safe space to play in and a very versatile niche, and it's something that can give you the best of both worlds. Activewear that is performant but is also flattering and comfortable. So bear that in mind and carefully consider which niche you're designing for, because women will generally have different requirements from the different sportswear they buy. So in conclusion, hopefully by now you have a better idea of what it takes to design ladies sportswear. Obviously there are a ton more principles and specifics to consider, and obviously there's no rule book. You can do what feels right, but I wanted to give you a general guide on how to approach sportswear and how to categorize the different areas that you'll want to look at. If you guys enjoyed this video and want to see us do another version but for men, please let us know in the comments below. And if you guys genuinely enjoy this video and the content we put, please consider smashing a thumbs up so that others can see it as well. Thank you guys so much again for tuning in to Fittdesign TV. Until next time, stay awesome.